the Westerners that they accused the Soviet Union of
Holodomor.
doing, the Holodomor. Yeah, go ahead. So tell me the facts about it. Like, what are the lies about it, and what should people know about it?
Yeah, so first of all, the word Holodomor, it means to starve people, right? To kill with starvation. That's what it means. And this this phrase, this word, right? It was coined way after the famine actually happened. It was basically invention of Nazis, and people don't know this because for so many years nobody knew about it. It was after the World War II when it started being like circulated in Western media, and Western Ukrainian diasporas in different countries started pushing this myth about Holodomor and saying it was deliberate, it was intentional genocide of Ukrainians. So the years that this is being attributed to is 1932, 1933. So this is before World War II, and this is when Ukraine was part of Soviet Union. So the part of the myth is that Stalin hated Ukrainians and he just wanted to kill Ukrainians. Well, first of all, that's not true. Stalin was known as an internationalist. He was Georgian himself, so he was a minority. He was trying to have this peace among different communities, different nationalities in the Soviet Union. So he was trying to have, equal rights for everyone. He was not trying to take away the bread and food from people like Ukrainians are trying to portray. The famine that actually happened had multiple reasons, and it didn't just happen in Ukraine. At that time, the famines were happening in Russian territory, so by Ural Mountains. There was a big famine over there. There was famine in Iran at that time. It was a Great Depression in the United States as well, and somehow people are forgetting that many people have died in the United States as well because of the Great Depression. So these were tough times everywhere around the world. In Ukraine specifically, there were some weather changes that there were droughts, and when there is droughts, there is not enough harvest. Therefore, for a developing country, and that this country I'm talking is the Soviet Union, right? It just, first of all, the revolution happened 1917, but it was the end of World War I. It was very bad time for Soviet Union because the whole world was against them. Right after the revolution, after they started establishing their country, 14 countries invaded Soviet Union in 1921. This is called as Allied intervention, I think. They from all corners, they surrounded Soviet Union. So Japan from one side, Germany, France, United States, like all kinds of countries, they all invaded Soviet Union, and they were trying to bring Soviets power down, right? So they were going through all this during 20s, and then in the towards the end of 20s, beginning of 30s, that's when Soviet Union started really building the country, developing. They tried to bring electricity to all corners of the country, build roads. So they needed lots of manpower, and they needed lots of produce to feed these people. So they started doing collectivization. And in Ukraine, there were these kulaks. Kulaks were the wealthy peasants who owned the land, and they didn't want to do collectivization with other farmers, and they didn't want to drop the peasantry in the feudal form, what they were used to. So they wanted to continue their exploitation of poor people and just hoard the wealth and don't share it with anyone. So there were these kulaks who were sabotaging. They would, instead of sharing and doing collectivization, doing everything together, they would rather burn their wheat. They would kill their cattle instead of submitting to the collectivization. So these sabotages, plus the weather changes, plus the hardships of after being invaded for so many years and fighting wars, all this together, like a cumulative effect, I would say, caused the famine. But there was never a deliberate, like intentional, you know, will from Stalin or Russians in general to starve Ukrainians. That was never a part. And this myth of Holodomor, it was started by Nazis themselves in Germany. So they had their, I forgot the name of the paper, but it was German paper that started using the word genocide. Like they were reporting on famine happening in Soviet Union, and they started using the word genocide. And then the American media picked it up. What was his name? Hearst?
Seymour Hersh, is it?
No,
Thomas
Seymour Hearst is the modern journalist.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Hearst. I think it was Hersh or something, but like you were saying.
Hearst. Yeah, I think his name is Hearst. He had a newspaper in Chicago and in New York, I believe, and he went to Germany. He met with Adolf Hitler, and he sent one of his journalists to Soviet Union to basically witness the famine. And at first, that journalist was just saying it's famine, but then after the Hearst met with Hitler, and they most likely they have made some sort of a deal. And this is the same guy who was employing Mussolini. Mussolini was writing articles for Hearst. So Hearst was like an employer for Mussolini. So he was collaborating with both Hitler and Mussolini. And that journalist who was working for, I think it was Chicago Tribune or something. I don't remember what was the name of the newspaper, but he was first writing just calling it a famine. But then after those deals have been made, I think in 1935, that's when they started saying, oh, it's a genocide. And then it still wasn't picked up by mainstream, or it didn't go anywhere until the Cold War came, and until the United States and its empire needed some like foolproof, like some hardcore so-called evidence against Stalin, against Soviet Union. They wanted to like smear them, right? So they were really in 70s and 80s. That's when this myth of Holodomor really started being pushed on American academia. So some Ukrainian Americans, from diaspora who were in academia, they started pushing this. They started making movies. I think there was a movie called Harvest of Sorrow, made in 1986, and that movie was like a big push for this myth. And if people want to learn more about the myth of Holodomor, there is a great book. It's called Fraud, Famine, and Fascism. It's written by Douglas Toddle. You can buy it from New Outlook publishers or some other publishers. It's available as a PDF online too, so you can read it for free if you want. This book goes into great detail on how the myth was born, how it was developed, and how they were pushing it. Like for example, the pictures that they're using, like there's museums of Holodomor around the world, and if you go and look at on those pictures, most of those pictures are not even from Ukraine. Like there are some pictures from Urals, some pictures from Iran, some pictures from United States, Great Depression. Like back then there was no internet, and there was no like reverse image search, right? Or there was no internet archive, right? The tools that right now we're using to debunk some myths, right? Like right now, if somebody posts something, we can easily do a reverse search image and see when that image was taken and stuff like that. So we can prove someone wrong. back then in 70s and 80s, they didn't have these tools, so they came up with a lot of nonsense. And because they were repeating that nonsense for so long, for so many decades, that it just got accepted as truth. So now everybody believes that Holodomor was deliberate and it was done on purpose, but it was not. So yeah, that's one thing that helped me really kind of at first I was pushing back. I remember 10 years ago when my husband was telling me that that's not true, the Holodomor was made up. I was pushing back. I was like, no, I grew up listening to these horror stories, how people were starving and how and then I remember thinking, how can I even say that? Because yes, I grew up listening to those stories, but I grew up in Western Ukraine. And Western Ukraine was not part of Soviet Union when Holodomor supposedly happened. So how is it possible that my family members, my relatives were telling me these horror stories when they were not part of Soviet Union? They were with Poland. So there was no famine in Western Ukraine. So they made it up. They were just like, it's like collective hysteria. Like I can't even explain. I don't know how is it possible. Maybe they heard some stories from other parts of Ukraine, right, from eastern, where there was actually a famine, and they just adopted it. And because they wanted to push anti-Russian propaganda, they started adding to it, and they no just to kind of have something to say about how bad Russians are, right? But the more I thought about, the more I realized that it's all made up. It's not a true thing. And now I am super careful when I hear about some historical events. I always double check, and I always try to find primary sources and see if people have any evidence, because without evidence you can make up anything.